Welcome back to Where the Ramp Ends. I'm Bryce.
And I'm Summer. Our guest today is Maria Towne, President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. Maria is a nationally recognized disability rights leader who has dedicated her career to advancing equity, inclusion, and civic engagement for people with disabilities. Through her leadership at AAPD, she works to strengthen disability representation in public policy, expand opportunities for community involvement, and ensure that disabled voices are heard at every level of government. We're excited to have her join us to discuss disability advocacy, civic
Yes.
engagement, and our recent trip to Washington, D.C. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much, Summer and Bryce, for having me. I'm delighted to be here today.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, we recently joined AAPD in Washington, D.C. for advocacy meetings. From your perspective, why is it important for policymakers to hear directly from people with disabilities and their families?
Well, Bryce, that's a great question. So I want to back up a little bit and tell folks about what AAPD is. So AAPD stands for the American Association of People with Disabilities, and there are two words in our name that I think are the most important. One is disability, but two is of, okay? And a lot of people will try to turn the of into for. But we are of disabled people by disabled people. So AAPD is a cross disability civil rights organization that is entirely led by people with disabilities. So I have cerebral palsy, just like you, Bryce.
Yep.
Everyone on our team is a person with a disability, and most people on our team have different disabilities. So we work with folks who are blind, deaf, who have autism, who have mental health disabilities, chronic illnesses, and even those of us with the same disability have very different access needs and preferences. And one of the reasons that AAPD was founded was really to build on the collective power of the disability community. So instead of all of these different condition focused groups advocating for their own issues, we try to advocate for issues that affect people with disabilities across the kind of spectrum of the disability experience. So that's AAPD. And core to our work is the sort of value and development of disabled leadership. And that brings us to Disability Power on the Hill. Disability Power on the Hill is an annual event that we've hosted now for 3 years, where we bring disability advocates and their allies. Sometimes it's family members or caregivers from across the country to meet with elected officials. So this year we brought around 75 people to Washington D.C. from 17 states, and they met with their House members and their senators to talk about issues like protecting Medicaid, improving the Social Security Supplemental Security Income Program, funding inclusive education, and more. And part of why we do this is so that people with disabilities realize and understand their power to influence change at the local, state, and national level. And the other reason that we do this is because often, people with disabilities, even today, even though there's been so much progress made, oftentimes we are out of sight and out of mind, right?
Correct.
We are stuck at
Yes.
home because we don't have accessible transportation, or we're put in an institution, and that invisibility creates this
Uh,
vicious cycle, right, of
this is
more invisibility. And so it is incredibly powerful when people with disabilities show up in the halls of Congress. It forces congressional offices, elected officials, and their staffs to really think about disability, consider who is in their constituency, and understand who is affected by the decisions they're making when they decide to either make cuts to or fund a program.
yes.
Um, yeah. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's
And
why we do it.
my personal experience as somebody with cerebral palsy, I have a college degree and several public speaking certifications and life coaching certifications. And my issue is with all those certifications and everything else, a lot of the times I still feel like I'm treated in society like a second class citizen. I don't get um the opportunity to get a lot of full-time public speaking because a lot of people don't see me as an individual, and I make an argument all the time that if I was an able-bodied individual with all the credentials that I have, I would be well over making six figures, well over. But since I sit in a chair, I don't get those opportunities. And that's why I created this podcast and want to create, opportunities with all these organizations is I want to show people that just because you have a disability does not mean you can't have the career and make the money that you want just because society tries to limit you because of your physical limitations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Maria, during our trip, we met with congressional offices about
Mhm.
issues affecting the disability community. Do you want to go into a little bit of detail about some of the policies that we met with legislators about that the AAPD is focused on this year?
Yeah, thanks, Summer, for the opportunity to talk about this. So, one of our biggest sort of asks was not tied to specific legislation, but was a general ask to protect Medicaid. And as I'm sure you both know, Medicaid is an essential program for many, many people with disabilities
Absolutely.
across the United States, right? One in every three people with disabilities are insured by Medicaid. And Medicaid is important for a couple of reasons um, beyond healthcare coverage, which is essential, right? People
Mm.
with disabilities have often have more healthcare related expenses and are higher users of our healthcare system than non-disabled people. So the healthcare is important. And in addition to the healthcare itself, Medicaid is really the only insurance vehicle that will cover home and community based services. So if you are someone who needs assistance getting out of bed, if you need assistance eating, if you need assistance going to the bathroom, the only way that you can really afford that level of caregiving is through Medicaid.
Right.
Private insurance does not cover it. And I mean, some people are independently wealthy and they can pay for it out of pocket, but by some, that's a very small percentage, right?
Yes.
And so Medicaid is a program that helps to keep people with disabilities in our homes and in our communities with the families and friends that we love. And it's also a part of the way that we make civil rights, our civil rights promise of community integration, real. The Olmstead decision, right, which basically said that states cannot forcibly institutionalize people with disabilities, Medicaid makes that real. Um, Also, in addition to HCBS, Medicaid also pays for things like supported employment for people with disabilities, community mental health services, and so last year in July of 2025, a bill passed through Congress that AAPD fought very hard against that will ultimately cut $1 trillion from Medicaid over the course of the next decade. That is the largest cuts to the program ever in its 60-year history. And we need it. We need Congress to know that this is going to have consequences. Real ones. You know, people are going to lose their ability to live at home. They might get sicker and many will die. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, um but it's true. So the big ask was to try to protect Medicaid. I want to be real. We had some legislators that I was in the meetings with who's told people to their faces there's not going to be any cuts to Medicaid. And that's not true. The cuts are happening. They are happening right now, and they will happen more cuts will happen by January if something doesn't change. So that was a big push. Related to specific legislation, we talked to legislators about the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act. Have either of you had experience with SSI?
I am not currently on SSI, no.
Where
I
you
I
at?
am I am on my dad's death benefit is the only thing that I received from the state, unfortunately.
So I was on SSI.
I haven't had either, and that's why I think it's important to have a group of advocates to go in because I felt more comfortable talking about IDEA because I have a
Right.
daughter. I think that's important to have somebody come in and experience with that. So I really didn't talk too much on that.
Well, so I was on SSI for a very long time, and thankfully, I'm no longer on SSI. But when you're on supplemental security income as a person with a disability, you get a monthly cash benefit, and you also oftentimes SSI means automatic Medicaid eligibility. And so again, a lot of people are on SSI because it helps to make sure they have the health care they need to survive.
Right.
And so the issue is that SSI limits you. You can only have $2,000 in assets per month. $2,000 does not get you very far
Well,
at
unfortunately.
all.
No.
And that limit has not changed in the past 40 years. And just think about how much more expensive life has gotten in the past
Yes.
40 years, right? And so this bill, the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act, would increase that asset limit to $10,000 and tie it to inflation. So we wouldn't have to do this again, once $10,000 became not enough to live on or save. And so if this increase to the asset limit were to happen, this means that more people with disabilities could save for emergencies, could actually work and earn meaningful wages. And for a lot of people who need to get on SSI, they either have to divorce because their partner's income counts against them, or they
Yes.
can never get married.
The marriage penalty. Yes. Yes,
Mhm.
yes, yes.
And so this legislation, if it passed, would help to reduce the instances of people getting divorced or allow more people to get married. And then, Summer, you already mentioned it. We also talked about the IDEA Full Funding Act. So, 50 years ago, literally, when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act passed, the federal government promised states that it would match funding at 40%. It has never done that. And inclusive education has remained really underfunded. School districts are constantly just like starving for resources, and we need the government to hold up to its promises. And so that was the other piece of legislation that we championed.
Yeah, and that just blows my mind that it's never been fully funded.
No.
And yet, public schools get criticism all the time. And yet I understand the frustration with parents, but we also need to hold our legislators accountable and not just always Maria, you're so good at with words. I wish I was good a speaker as you. But we need to go and ask our legislators to pass this so our schools are getting the support they need. We need
Yeah.
to stop just constantly getting mad at our schools and look to our legislators and ask them to support our schools and get this funding going.
'Cause I graduated high school 10 years ago, and even when I was in high school and, secondary, middle school, I could even see that the school that I attended were starving with resources. We were still using textbooks that were 2 and 3 years old, and, the information in the textbooks weren't up to date and things like that. So, this is a problem that we're gonna continue to see until people use their voice and step up and say, "This is not good enough."
Yeah, and I think, Bryce, to your point, like when we talk about advocacy and what it means to be an advocate, a huge part of my idea of what it means to be an advocate is being able to envision
Yes.
a a better world, right? A better
Absolutely.
reality and then fight for it.
You know,
Um, yeah.
I say all the time, and Summer, you're gonna smile when I say this. I don't advocate for my life. I'm perfectly fine with how my life turned out. I want the next generation of people with
Yeah.
disabilities, my brothers and sisters, to not have to fight as hard as did. And that includes, Summer's daughter, Julia, who's 6 years old. I want a better reality and a better world for her. I don't want people to look at Summer's daughter, Julia, and say, oh, she has Down syndrome. I want her to be looked at like, oh, that's Julia in my class. She happens to have Down syndrome. I don't want Down syndrome to be the first thing that they look at. Does that make sense?
It does, and, I would argue that it's actually I'll use myself as an example. It's okay if the first thing people see about me is cerebral palsy. I think that's fine. Um, but if it's the first thing they see, I don't want their immediate reaction to be that it's a bad thing
Yeah, that's what I
or
mean. Yes.
to feel sorry for me.
Yes.
I was on the phone with with a utility company recently because people should know this. If you are someone who relies on powered equipment like a wheelchair, an adjustable bed, an oxygen machine, you should let your utility company know so that if there's a power outage, your power gets prioritized. And so I was on the phone with my utility company making sure that they knew I used a power mobility device. And when I mentioned this to the lady, I said, "Oh, well, I have a disability and I use a power mobility scooter." And she goes, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "Well, it's fine. I was born this way. I lead a good life." And she said, "I'm just so sorry." And it
And
was I was really taken aback, but that shouldn't have been her response.
no.
Yeah. I get that a lot whenever I say I have a daughter with Down syndrome, like, I'm sorry." And I've gotten to where I'm like, don't be sorry, I'm not, like,
Right.
there's nothing to be sorry about.
I get that response at least once a week from people.
Yeah. Um, I wanna go back to something that Summer mentioned, which is the fact that a lot of times, um, advocates get upset, and rightfully so, at what's happening locally. They might get upset at their
Sure.
schools or at their school district, and, um, th there's a lot of times where schools and school districts are not doing what they're supposed to, they're not doing the right thing. And sometimes that is because they don't have enough resources and that issue connects to, state decisions at the state government or at the federal government. And part of the issue with these Medicaid cuts is that the folks that voted for them, the bad guys are actually going to be people in the states, right? Because they're the ones that are going to have to make the decisions around the cuts. And
Mhm.
part of what we need to do, especially at the federal level, is not let people get out of accountability. Like even if they're not the ones making the actual cuts on paper at the state level, it's their decisions
Yeah.
that drove states here in the first place. And people need to understand that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that advocates do need to just kinda soak in is that it's so important to advocate on every level.
Hmm.
On advocate with your school, but also advocate with your community and with your state legislators and with your federal legislators, and, it's a lot of work, but you really
Yes.
do have to make your voice heard at every level.
But to be an amazing advocate, to your point, Summer, you have to put in the work. I mean, it's not gonna be an easy, it's not a free ride. Maria knows this as a fellow CP warrior. Advocacy is not easy. We've advocated all our lives. It's not something we're gonna stop doing if we want people with disabilities' lives to be just as equal and as privileged as people with able-bodied.
So, Maria, a lot of people want to get involved, but they aren't sure where to start.
Hmm.
Kind of on the subject, what are some practical ways individuals can become effective disability advocates in their own communities?
So there are so many ways that people can become disability advocates. I'll talk about AAPD first. So I would encourage everyone to get involved with AAPD. We often will send out action alerts related to advocacy asks. You can sign up for our email list at our website, aapd.com. You can also follow us on social media and get access to action alerts and kind of ways to influence policies that will impact people with disabilities. Sometimes our action alerts will ask people to call or contact their legislators. That can sound intimidating, but it actually um, can be very straightforward. Bryce, you could email your congressperson in Oklahoma and say, "My name is Bryce. I live in your district. I don't like what you're doing,"
Yes.
or my name is Summer. I live in your district. I really like what you're doing. So please keep doing it. Advocacy doesn't always have to be negative. Sometimes we want to thank the people that are doing good work and provide them with encouragement to inspire better work from their colleagues. Um, Other times, our AAPD's action alerts might be asking people to submit comments on regulations, and we will have an action alert coming out related to Medicaid regulations again that are around all these cuts, where we need people to comment and tell the agency that's over all of Medicaid, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, how these Medicaid work requirements will work, who should be exempt, what they should look like, all of that stuff. So we'll be asking people to submit comments. And some comments, they don't have to be very technical. You could say, um, all of the information that states put out about Medicaid work requirements needs to be accessible. To me, accessible means available in print and available in video communication. If you do video communication, it needs to be captioned. I think sometimes people get intimidated because they think they don't have enough expertise. But one
Sure.
thing that advocates all have is significant expertise in their own lives. And so you don't have to know the policy backwards and forwards. That's my job. That's my team's job. What you need to be able to do is say, "This is important to me, and here's why." So that's AAPD. We also have an initiative called Rev Up. Rev Up stands for Register, Educate, Vote, Use Your Power. And Rev Up is focused on increasing civic engagement amongst people with disabilities. And so we have different Rev Up state coalitions. Right now, we have 22 Rev Up state coalitions, and we have like 4 emerging coalitions. So hopefully 26 soon. And so ho- folks can get engaged in Rev Up at their local level. You can also find out about it on our website. And in September, we will host Disability Voting Rights Week. I believe that's September 15th through the 19th, and there'll be lots of different events across the country, candidate forums, voter registration drives that are accessible, all kinds of things, and I hope people get involved. So at the state and local level, I think that there are just incredible resources. I know that Partners in Policy Making was really important to y'all and really foundational in creating this
Yes,
podcast.
100%.
Folks should
Yeah.
apply to participate in partners. There are all kinds of great disability advocacy coalitions in the states. There's groups like the Coalition of Disabled Texans, the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. I'm going to get the name slightly wrong, but there's like the Michigan Disability Rights Coalition that do all kinds of advocacy and are great to get engaged with. And I also want to shout out Centers for Independent Living. There are multiple Centers for Independent Living in every state. These organizations are run by people with disabilities and do a lot of great advocacy work. So look up your local Center for Independent Living and find out how to get involved.
For someone who has never participated in a Hill visit before, what impact can a single conversation with a legislator or staff member actually have on the constituent? on the representatives?
So from our Hill Day, I know that we got at least 4 new co-sponsors for our priority legislation, which is a big deal. And specifically, the SSI Savings Penalty Elimination Act has what we call bicameral bipartisan support. So it has support from Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate. Pieces of legislation like that are rare today. And uh, every co-sponsor that we get basically gives it a better chance at passing. Um, Another kind of impact that's a little bit less direct, but is still really important, is when a constituent meets with their office and talks about the issues they are encountering. It can actually help to educate the office to give them ideas for future legislation. And part of why meeting with your elected officials is really important is to build relationships. And so they sometimes offices will reach out to you and say, "Summer, we want to work on this is a real example. People with disabilities serving on juries. What do you think?" Or they might reach out and say, "Bryce, we want to do more on supporting people with disabilities as they transition from youth to adulthood. Do you
Right.
have ideas?" Right. And so you can become someone who helps drive the legislative agenda.
And that is one of the things that I struggled with. And I'll give a brief example since you brought it up. When I transitioned out of college, I um, inhabited the services of the local rehabilitation services in my state. And my caseworker um, said to me when I wanted to become an insurance broker, I wanted to sell
You'd be
insurance.
so good at that.
She said, "Well, don't you think that would be a little difficult? The movie theater is hiring or Goodwill." And I said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, I just spent 6 years getting a degree, and I not that the movie theater and uh, Goodwill are bad jobs, but I want a career." I said, "Respectfully, I want you to close my case with rehabilitation services." And she said, What are you talking about?" And I said, "If you're not going to respect that I want more for my life than just working at the movie theater or Goodwill, I don't need your services, and I'm gonna make it on my own, and I'm gonna prove to people like you that people's lives with disabilities matter, and they deserve more y adequate employment than just the movie theater after I spent 6 years getting a college degree. So, I just feel like, we need to do a better job of getting people with disabilities adequate job opportunities, and we need to make sure that their skill sets are seen by people instead of putting them in the box. Like you said earlier in the beginning, Maria, they tend to put people with disabilities in a certain box, and we as a society need to quit doing that.
Yeah, Bryce, have you heard of the phrase "the tyranny of low expectations"?
Yes, I talk about this
Mm.
all the time. They lower the standards for people with disabilities, and it's one of the things that ticks me off so much is it's
Yeah.
because they take one look at us, and Maria, you can get this because you're a fellow cerebral palsy warrior. They're like, "Oh, how nice it is that they got out today.
Right.
Oh, that's great." Like, I'll give you a brief example. I was in Walmart, picking apples, okay? And this woman said, "Oh, that's so great that you got out today." I'm like, "What? I'm picking apples because I like apples. Like, I like fruit. Like it's this remarkable thing that I'm going to the grocery store and picking out groceries and doing regular things that if I was an able-bodied human being,
Yeah.
nobody would give a hoot that I got apples. But since I'm cere I have cerebral palsy and I'm going to the grocery store, getting things for myself, it's this extraordinary occasion that is newsworthy, Maria, that people should know about. It's frustrating.
Breaking news: person with disability goes to grocery store,
No kidding.
returns
More
home with apples.
Yeah, no kidding. But, and I don't know if you get this also in your personal life, but I feel like in my own life, I get stared at by people like I'm an amusement park attraction. Like, it's like, "Oh, look at the guy in the wheelchair. We've never seen one of those before." Like, "What?" And
Yeah.
it's not even the kids, Maria. It's the adults like, "Oh, I've never seen one of those kind before."
Well, Bryce, this is actually one of the reasons why I wear red lipstick. So for listeners, you can't see me, but I'm wearing bright red lipstick right now. And Bryce, I've been stared at my whole life. And
Right.
so I finally when I was in my 20s, I finally decided to take some more control over the situation and said like if they're going to stare, I may as well give them something to look at.
Right, exactly.
Um, and so, I think that this is a little bit different for men than it is for women, but I will intentionally like dress certain ways so that if someone is staring, I get to direct the conversation around what they're staring at.
Right, right.
And you could and I'm suggesting this seriously. You could like put some ridiculous decals that you love on your wheelchair. And so if somebody stares at you, like say, "Oh, do you like Captain America? Are you a fan of the Thunder?" Right?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, you
I
must
have
not be staring at me. I'm
yeah.
perfectly normal. Like just
Like, I use a golf ball to drive my wheelchair, and I'll get random people, and I've
yeah.
even been with Summer when they've done this. They're like, "I like your golf ball. Is that a golf ball?" I'm like, "No,
Right.
it's a, flotation device." And I'm like, "Yes, it's a golf ball. I drive it into the joystick so I can drive on it, so I don't have to drive on a bare joystick." It's like, "Come on, people." Like, it's not that hard to understand, but we can laugh at it as fellow cerebral palsy advocates that our life, you know, is hilarious to us because we live it. But, you know,
I have to tell you all a story because I think it's very relevant to the discussions of advocacy. Part of going back to like the power of showing up, right, is the
yeah,
power of visibility. And in the United States, there's a history of what we call ugly laws. Are you guys familiar with these?
Yes.
unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Right. And so ugly laws banned disabled people from being in public. The last one existed in through the 1970s, and right now we're kind of seeing a return to ugly laws. We're seeing states and the federal government in some instances make um, local laws that will ban unhoused people from being on the street, and a lot of unhoused people are also people with disabilities. Um, and so when we show up in the halls of Congress, what we're saying is you can't look away from us. You
Yeah.
have to see us,
We're
right?
here.
And a funny story is that when the disability community was fighting for the ADA in the late 80s, um, lots of folks who used mobility equipment showed up to engage in direct action in Washington, D.C., but they could not get arrested because there were no accessible police vehicles. You know,
That's
they couldn't
hilarious.
take us away.
Oh,
I
that's
love
hilarious.
that.
Mhm. Yeah,
I've only been part of the disability community as a parent for 6 years, so it's all new to me. But I will say, I'm so impressed because people with disabilities are so resilient, just like 504 sit in, and the solutions and the
yeah,
creativity is outstanding.
Yes. And I'm fortunate enough to be a part of the NACDD with Jill Jacobs as the executive director, and
yeah.
she is an amazing friend and advocate, and I really am really fortunate to be a part of her. coalition and what she's doing in Washington. And fortunately, while we were in Partners in Policy Making, we also got to uh, listen to Erin Pringley, who is with the NACDD also,
Yeah.
and she is going to eventually be coming on the podcast to be discussing policy. So, cultivating the relationships with all these wonderful folks in the disability community is truly been the highlight of my advocacy because one of the things that I see in the state level, and I'm sure it's like this nationwide, is these services exist, but the problem is, Maria, is we're not getting them to parents.
Mhm.
And they're feeling like they're on an island of misfit toys, and they feel like they're the only person in the world that are feeling, unheard and unseen. And the part that we need to do better as advocates is getting this information to the parents and being that segue between that.
I also think we have to get it to disabled people.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And I Bryce, you and I both have had our disabilities since we took our first breath,
Right.
but for
Unfortunately,
the
yes.
majority of disabled people in the United States, that's not their experience.
Right.
Uh, you know, more people in the US acquire a disability as they age than there are folks who are born with their disabilities.
Right.
And so, the experience of isolation that you're describing for parents is also true for people with disabilities as well. And I part of the way ableism works
Yes.
is by making you think you're the only one, when
Yep.
in reality, you are a part of a community of millions of people who are trying to make their lives better and the lives of others better. And so I think it's really a both and, um, because to Summer's point, adults with disabilities need to know what's out there
Yes.
too.
Yes.
And parents of people with disabilities need to listen to us.
And I'm glad that you brought that up on the social isolation of people with disabilities because until I got into the advocacy world as a public speaker and life coach, I really didn't feel like I had any direction in life. I was like, okay, I have cerebral palsy, but what is my life going to amount to? I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know I don't know what the world has for me. And then I got into a advocacy program called Oklahoma Land, and
Oh, cool.
uh, it was my first advocacy thing, and I was mentored by a fellow by the name of Chuck Roberts, who is a fellow cerebral palsy warrior who's been an advocate for over 40 years, and he's been all over the nation doing advocacy work. And he really opened up my eyes and said, Bryce, what needs to happen is we need to get young cats in here that are fired up and are educated and are tired and ready for change because he said, I'm getting up in age to where my advocacy, you know, journey is over. I'm fixing to retire.
Mhm.
So we need to get the young bloods in here that are ready to, continue to fight and pass the baton. And then the following year I signed up for Partners in Policy Making, and like, that's when it really opened the pores to, the 504 sit-in and the IDEA. I had heard a little bit about these, but I had
Mhm.
never gone in depth with these, and I'm like, "Wow, we really we have some work to do."
Yeah, absolutely.
Maria, you've kind of talked about this. One thing that stood out to me in DC was the diversity within the disability community. Can you talk a little bit? How does the AAPD work to ensure a wide range of disability perspectives are represented in the advocacy efforts?
So As I mentioned, AAPD is what's known as a cross disability organization. And so, you know, via our bylaws and our mission, we must ensure that a diversity of perspectives are represented. And disability is such a large umbrella of experiences that can actually be kind of hard to do. Like when we think about disability, we often think about mobility disabilities. We may often think about blindness or deafness or intellectual disabilities, but we also include chronic illness, mental health disabilities, other non apparent disabilities, um, as well as disabilities that might be more episodic rather than chronic. And for AAPD, one of the questions we are always asking ourselves is like, who's not here? And how do we make sure that they're here next time?
Mhm.
And so I was really thrilled that this year, for our Disability Power on the Hill event, we had a lot of participation from people in rural areas of the United States.
That's amazing.
Folks from Montana, folks from South Dakota, folks from Oklahoma, and that doesn't happen all the time in DC. We also, I think, had a really strong diversity of ages. So we had some folks who were there who were 19, early 20s, and other people who were in their 60s. And a- age, especially as it relates to disability, can actually be a big kind of factor in
Sure.
diversity. Um, but for anyone who's doing disability work, the question of who isn't here? How can I really expand my access practice is important to AAPD. And I want to be really clear, we're not perfect and we are constantly trying to get better. And
Right.
so soon we'll be launching a new program that is focused on folks who are newer to disability, because that's one of the gaps that we have. Most of our programs are really designed for people who already have a disability identity. But both of you know that some of the hardest work is developing that identity in the first place.
Unfortunately, yes.
Mhm.
And I spent many years, unfortunately, with depression and anxiety and figuring out where I fit in society. And to be honest, I tell people all the time in my speaking engagements that for the longest time I wanted nothing to do with disability or advocacy. I wanted to run as far away from it as I could. But
Mhm.
I realized after going to partners and going through Lind that I was going to use my disability and the the diagnosis that I was given to empower others, because I don't want other people to feel the way that I did, because for years I felt alone. So if
Yeah.
I have to spend the next 40 years championing change so that the next generation and the generation after me doesn't have to feel the way I felt, if I can change one person's perspective, then my suffering was worth it.
Yeah, and I wanna add, a part of the way that AAPD does that we do our work is through partnerships with other organizations. And so we'll reach out to NACDD, for example, and say, do you have folks in your network with intellectual and developmental disabilities in these states that we could bring to DC? We will reach
Mhm.
out to a long COVID organization and say, do you have any advocates
Sure.
who want to come to DC? And partnership is so essential in
Yes.
both effective advocacy, effective community building, and for AAPD's work, whether it is in kind of bringing people in or in our policy work, we spend a lot of time talking to groups that do focus on specific disabilities just to make sure the positions we're taking get it right.
Right.
And sometimes it means that our positions are complicated because not everyone in the disability community is on the same page, but
Right.
that's okay.
Exactly. But, I think to your point, collaboration is imperative, and I think having these conversations and being able to partner up from, you know, being able to show that we're a united front. So anything that you need from me and the AAPD needs from me as an advocate, as a champion, as a warrior with cerebral palsy, I'm all in because if we triumph together, we all win at the end of the day. We all can taste victory together if we, all champion the cause. That's what I
Mhm.
always say. It's like we're in this together.
Yeah. And I want to add, I do think that um, a cross disability perspective is actually really important, even for disability specific organizations. And I'll use cerebral palsy as an example. People with CP are blind,
Yes.
they are often hard of hearing. People with CP, as Bryce mentioned, often have psychiatric disabilities like anxiety and depression. There are blind folks who are chair users who have to learn how to navigate the world in a wheelchair with a white cane. And so in the spirit of like there is no single issue
No.
story, there's actually no single issue disability.
No,
And
unfortunately.
part of why we all kind of use these diagnostic categories is because that's been the dominant frame, right, around disability for so long. But when we really start breaking it down, how many folks with developmental disabilities, for example, are also people who have communication disabilities or
Right.
who have some kind of chronic illness like diabetes. I want to shout out some of the work happening in the Down syndrome community where they've realized that people with Down syndrome have a higher instance of Alzheimer's disease as they age. And so now folks with Down syndrome are in like clinical trials for Alzheimer's treatments, um, which is great. There's also, Summer, you probably know this, but like one thing that I've bonded with, folks with Down syndrome over is our shoes because people with disability I walk a little bit. I tear apart my shoes because of my unique gait pattern. Folks with Down syndrome do too because they have a unique gait pattern and unique feet. And so we bond over the fact that we can't
Oh
really
yeah.
find shoes. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about that the other day about finding shoes for my daughter.
And shoes
Can
are
be a little bit.
interesting for me because I also use AFOs and,
Yeah.
to try to find shoes to go over my AFOs, I have to usually go up a size and sometimes there's too much room. So,
Right.
it's fun to have a disability because you never know what kind of challenge you're gonna have in a day. It's never a perfect day when you have a disability, nothing, it never goes the way that you want it to, like, um, even, like, for technology, like, when we do this podcast, there is several times where I've been recording with Summer and I get kicked off and I get frustrated because of the Oklahoma wind, and I'm like, "This is
Oh, no.
this is just technology. I need it to survive," and it's like Zoom and voice to text have been saviors in my career because I've been able to be a part of local meetings and stuff like that in the freedom of my own house
Cool.
if I don't have adequate transportation that time.
Mhm.
And I
So,
and I just wanna make a comment too about, the importance of cross disability groups like AAPD. My first few years of being Julia's mom, I focused on being a Down syndrome advocate. I just really, like, honed in on that, and that was, I think a lot of parents do that.
Mhm.
yes,
Um, and then I went to the National Down Syndrome Congress convention, and they talked about how we do advocate for Down syndrome, but really we advocate for all disabilities
yes,
because we're all in it together. And
Yeah.
that's kind of when I was like, "Oh, I'm not a Down syndrome advocate. I need to look at this whole disability community." And
mhm,
I just the comment I wanna make is I do think it's important to be a part of, like, the Down Syndrome Congress, but
Yes.
then also I think parents and people new to disability need to kinda also have this space, like the AAPD, where we can all come together also
Mhm.
because
Yes.
we're so much stronger when in so many ways, our
We unify.
knowledge like, we
Yes,
build our knowledge,
absolutely.
we build our community, and so that's like, I just wanna encourage parents to kinda get out of that box, because I think it's such an easy thing to do. It's just kind of,
Mhm.
like, focus on
It
your
is.
child's disability and that community, and we really need to find a space where we come together with people with all disabilities.
Mhm.
I agree with that 100%, Summer. And I'm glad that you were able to have the knowledge yourself to come to that conclusion because it makes you a better advocate recognizing that. Like, I'm not just a Down syndrome mom, I'm a disability advocate in general because I want better not only for the Down syndrome community, I want better for the entire disability community. That's kudos to you for recognizing that. So I want you to understand that
Well,
that takes
I will
a lot of
say the Down Syndrome Congress initially, kind of made me aware of that, and then I became more aware of it doing partners in policy making. So just, like, I kudos to those groups that really,
shout out to Jen
make
Randall.
people. Yes.
And shout out to Stephanie Smith Lee and all the great work that the Down Syndrome Congress is doing. We AAPD partners with them quite often, so it's great.
Yeah, we just did a podcast with Jawanda Mast,
Mm,
and, we've done one with Ricky Sabia with the Down Syndrome Congress, and we're getting ready to do one with Stephanie also. So,
great.
amazing group. Maria, looking ahead, what gives you hope about the future of disability rights and disability inclusion in the United States?
This is gonna sound cheesy, but this podcast, I think
Oh,
so when I think about the information that I had access to as a young disabled person, it was, I mean, barely anything compared to what's out there now. And I love that there are so many touch points of really authentic voices in the disability space, sharing their experiences, sharing their goals and dreams. And people just have so much more access to information than they've ever had before. And I particularly love that it's, disabled people leading the way, and honestly, like, parents like you, Summer, who recognize the need for solidarity, because that has not always been the case, and it gives me a lot of hope to see that trend changing. I think some of the other things that give me hope are, um, the so when we at APD, when we work on our, one of the other programs we have is our Summer Internship Program. We've run this program for over 20 years. And in that program, we place students and recent grads with disabilities into paid internships with federal agencies on Capitol Hill, or with other disability rights organizations. And you both know, and Bryce, you've experienced this yourself, the employment rate of people with disabilities is really low, really,
yes,
really low, right?
yes.
The alumni of AAPD summer internship programs, seven more than 70% of them are employed full time,
That's
and they
incredible.
earn $35 an hour, or more on average, which
That's
is
incredible.
more than the average hourly wage for non-disabled people. And so programs like that give me a lot of hope. And one of the reasons I'm talking about this summer internship program on this podcast is because I want more programs like this to exist.
Yes,
You know, um, And so there's actually a lot of things giving me hope right now. The other thing that I always like to remind people is, um, when there are people or organizations trying to take your power away, the reason they're trying to do it is because of how effective you've been in the past.
yes.
And so it is not anything that is occurring now that might threaten disability rights or threaten the lives of disabled people is not happening because
Well,
disabled people and our families are powerless. It is happening because we are powerful. and have
Yes.
changed the landscape of this
Yes.
country multiple times.
Yes. Say it
Um,
louder for the people in the back. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And so, I know that there's a lot that is really scary right now, and will likely be scary for a little bit, but we will sort of have an opportunity to be just as effective, and shape our
Yes.
country for the better moving forward.
And this is why I signed up to do this podcast, is to share stories like this and to collaborate with people that are so powerful, because if I wouldn't have done this podcast with Summer, I wouldn't have gotten the champion voices like you, Maria, and now I can't wait to get started to do work with you, because I we have so many things in common, and even though we've only talked an hour, I
Yeah.
feel like I've known you my entire life, because you understand it. You get it. And that's the point, is we understand because we live the same life.
I told Bryce, I said, "Maria's gonna blow you away. She's she's an amazing human being, and
Yes.
she's gonna blow you away." So, um, I yeah,
I'm ready to get to work with you, my friend.
I'm so grateful you took the time to join us today. I'm gonna let Bryce, I always ask, like, a final question, and then I'm gonna give you a chance to share any final thoughts that you wanna share with our listeners, before we sign off.
So this is a fan favorite final question that everybody loves, and it's kind of a complex one, but I'm gonna throw it at you anyway.
Okay.
What do you want your legacy to be, Maria?
Mm, oh man. What do I want my legacy to be? I want my legacy to be more opportunities for disability community for more people.
Yes.
For
Yes.
me, I have seen disability community like literally save lives over and over again. And when I finally got connected to disability community, my world expanded in ways
Yes.
that I could have never imagined. And I just want that for everybody. And,
Feel the same way.
if I get no like, I don't need to have my name attached to policy wins. I don't need to have, my name on buildings. If more disabled people get an opportunity to be in community with one another as a result of my work, I will be really proud.
Well, you're already doing that, so you're in a step in the right direction. I mean, I've talked to you for an hour, and I already want to get to work with you and do whatever we can to continue to fight the good fight, because yes, this need to happen yesterday, but I
Yeah.
mean, you know, so I've been fired up to meet you since Summer mentioned you several weeks back. So
Um, so Maria, what final thoughts do you have for our listeners?
Um, One is if you I'm trying to think about how to give you something that's both general and specific. One is if you are experiencing a problem, you are not alone. If you're
no,
experiencing it, somebody else is experiencing it too. And so, which also means that somebody else has figured it out. And so it is worth it to try to build relationships in your local community, um, and create those sort of community networks to push for more and better. Um, the the other thing that I want to say is that again, advocacy does not have to be this scary, serious thing. Anyone can be an advocate if you have preferences and a way to communicate those preferences. You can be an advocate. And so, even if it is just blinking your eyes to indicate whether you like something or not, that can be advocacy. And so on that note, like get comfortable with your own voice, whether that is in writing or speech or
yes.
any other way that you communicate, because just like policy, just like benefits programs like Medicaid, your voice is one of the greatest tools you have to affect positive change. And so get comfortable with it and use it like you would any other tool.
To Maria's point, and I'll end with this, for people with disabilities, sometimes our voice is our only tool to be
Hmm.
heard. And you got to know it and you got to own it. You got to own your voice and say, this is what we want and this is what we need to survive. And Maria, you are a wonderful example of wonderful things going on in the community. And we're about out of time. So until next time, for Where the Ramp Ends, I'm Bryce,
And I'm Summer.
and this is Where the Ramp Ends and where your journey begins. Till next time, bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Those small actions make a big difference in helping others discover our podcast. We believe these conversations matter. By sharing stories, experiences, and perspectives from the disability community, we hope to increase awareness, understanding, and inclusion for people with disabilities and their families. Your support helps us continue this work and reach more listeners who need these conversations. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend or on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.